Marcus Johnson wiped the sweat from his brow as he surveyed his 40-acre farm in the early morning light. The third-generation farmer had inherited this land from his grandfather, who had purchased it in 1952 when few black families could afford such property. Now, 60-year-old Marcus grew organic vegetables and raised free-range chickens, supplying local restaurants and farmers markets throughout the county. For years, Marcus had watched as suburban development crept closer to his farm. The latest threat came in the form of Willowbrook Estates, a luxury housing development managed by one of the most aggressive HOAs in the state. The development bordered his property on two sides, and from the beginning, the Willowbrook HOA had made it clear they considered his farm an eyesore. The trouble began 3 months ago when Marcus noticed strange activity near his property line. Large construction vehicles appeared at dawn, and by the time he reached the area, they were gone. Then came the complaints. His roosters were too loud, his farm equipment violated noise ordinances, and his organic fertilizer created unsanitary conditions. But Marcus had been farming longer than most of these suburbanites had been alive. He knew his rights, and he knew his land. Every complaint was legally baseless, and he responded to each with documented proof of his compliance with all agricultural regulations. Then came the discovery that changed everything. It was a Tuesday morning when Marcus's border collie, Rex, started acting strangely. The dog kept pawing at a section of ground near the eastern property line, whining and circling. Marcus grabbed a shovel and began digging where Rex indicated. 3 feet down, his shovel struck something hard and hollow. What he found made his blood boil: a concrete tunnel, roughly 4 feet in diameter, running directly under his property. The tunnel was clearly new construction, with fresh concrete and modern materials. But more importantly, it ran from the Willowbrook development directly to the county's main water line on the far side of his farm. Marcus followed the tunnel's path, documenting everything with photographs and measurements. The tunnel traversed nearly 800 feet of his property without his knowledge or consent. He quickly realized what had happened. The HOA had secretly constructed this tunnel to connect their development to municipal water services, avoiding the expensive process of extending the main line around his property. Instead of confronting the HOA immediately, Marcus decided to do his research. He spent the next week at the county courthouse, the planning department, and the city engineer's office. What he discovered was a web of corruption and illegal activity. The tunnel construction had never been permitted. No environmental impact study had been conducted. No easement had been requested or granted. The HOA had simply trespassed on his property and built their infrastructure illegally, likely assuming that a black farmer wouldn't have the resources or knowledge to fight back, but they had underestimated Marcus Johnson. Marcus had earned a degree in agricultural engineering before taking over the family farm. He understood construction, water systems, and property law better than most developers. And after 40 years of dealing with discrimination and bureaucratic roadblocks, he had learned patience and strategic thinking. His first call was to his lawyer, Janet Martinez, who had helped him navigate previous disputes with neighboring developments. Janet's eyes lit up when she saw Marcus's documentation. "This is a slam-dunk case," she said, reviewing the photographs and surveys. "Trespassing, construction without permits, environmental violations, and potentially fraud if they filed false documents. We could sue for millions in damages." But Marcus had a different idea. "I don't want their money," he said. "I want justice. And I want to make sure they can't do this to anyone else." Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus quietly implemented his plan. First, he filed complaints with every relevant government agency: the county planning department, the state environmental protection agency, the Public Utilities Commission, and the state attorney general's office. Next, he contacted investigative reporters at 3 local news stations and 2 newspapers, providing them with copies of all his documentation. The story of a black farmer uncovering illegal construction by a wealthy HOA was exactly the kind of David versus Goliath narrative that captured public attention. But Marcus's masterstroke was yet to come. Had noticed that the tunnel's construction had damaged his property's natural drainage system. Heavy rains 2 weeks earlier had caused flooding in his lower fields for the first time in decades. Marcus realized that the tunnel had disrupted underground water flow, creating potential flooding issues not just for his farm, but for the entire area. Working with a consulting hydrologist, Marcus documented how the tunnel violated natural water flow patterns. The expert's report concluded that the tunnel created significant flood risks during heavy rainfall and could cause foundation damage to houses in the Willowbrook development itself. Armed with this information, Marcus made his move. On a Friday morning, he appeared at the monthly Willowbrook HOA board meeting with his lawyer, his hydrologist, and a folder full of documentation. The board members, 5 middle-aged white professionals, clearly expected to intimidate the black farmer into submission. HOA President Richard Whitmore, a pompous real estate developer, opened the meeting by stating that Marcus was only allowed 5 minutes to speak as a community member with concerns. Marcus smiled and placed his folder on the table. "Actually, Mr. Whitmore, I'm not here as a community member. I'm here as the owner of property that your organization has illegally trespassed upon and damaged. The room fell silent as Marcus methodically presented his evidence. Photographs of the tunnel. Survey maps showing its path across his property. Documentation proving no permits had been issued. The hydrologist's report about flood risks, board member Patricia Stevens tried to interrupt. Now see here, we have every right to, you have no rights on my property, Marcus said calmly. What you have is a federal lawsuit waiting to be filed, criminal charges for trespassing and construction fraud, and a public relations nightmare that's about to go national. He pulled out copies of news articles that would be published the following Monday. The headlines read, Wealthy HOA illegally tunnels under black farmer's land and secret construction threatens historic farm. Whitmore's face turned red. You can't prove we knew about any tunnel construction. Marcus smiled and pulled out his final piece of evidence, construction invoices he had obtained through a public records request, showing payments from the Willowbrook HOA to Pinnacle Construction for underground utility installation with GPS coordinates that matched his property exactly. These invoices are signed by you, Mr. Whitmore, Marcus said. Unless you're claiming you approved payments for work you didn't know about, which would be financial negligence and potential embezzlement of HOA funds. The board members exchanged panicked glances. They huddled in whispered conversation before Whitmore returned to the microphone. What do you want? He asked through gritted teeth. Marcus had prepared for this moment. First, your organization will immediately cease all complaints and harassment regarding my farm operations. Second, you will pay for a complete environmental remediation of my property, including restoration of the natural drainage system. Third, you will establish a $500,000 fund for agricultural preservation in this county. That's ridiculous. Stevens protested. We'll fight this in court. Marcus nodded to his lawyer, who stood up. That's certainly your right, Janet said. Of course, fighting this in court means all of this becomes public record. It also means we'll be seeking punitive damages, which in cases of willful trespassing and construction fraud typically run into the millions. Plus, there's the matter of the flood risks. She placed the hydrologist's report on the table. Dr. Peterson's analysis shows that your tunnel construction has created significant flooding risks for your own development. Heavy rains could cause millions in property damage to your homeowners. Once this report becomes public record, every insurance company will know about the increased flood risk. Property values will plummet, and you'll face lawsuits from your own residents. The board members looked stricken. They had assumed they were dealing with a simple farmer who could be bulldozed with legal threats and bureaucratic pressure. Instead, they faced a strategic opponent who had outmaneuvered them at every turn. Board Treasurer James Morrison leaned forward. What guarantee do we have that you won't sue us anyway? Simple, Marcus replied. Meet my terms, and I'll sign a settlement agreement. Refuse, and this goes public Monday morning. I've already been contacted by CNN and the Washington Post. Apparently, stories about environmental racism and corporate land grabs are very popular right now. The board called a recess and huddled with their lawyer for 30 minutes. When they returned, Whitmore's arrogance had been replaced by defeated resignation. We accept your terms, he said quietly. Over the following months, Marcus watched with satisfaction as his victory unfolded. The Willowbrook HOA paid for complete environmental remediation of his property, including installation of a new drainage system that actually improved his farm's irrigation capabilities. The Agricultural Preservation Fund provided grants to 3 other family farms in the county, helping them resist pressure from developers, but the sweetest victory came 6 months later, when heavy rains tested the area's drainage systems. Thanks to the new drainage infrastructure on Marcus's property, his farm experienced no flooding. The Willowbrook development, however, wasn't so fortunate. Several houses experienced basement flooding due to the poorly designed tunnel system. The homeowners sued the HOA, Pinnacle Construction, and the county for allowing illegal construction. Property values in Willowbrook plummeted by 30%. Within a year, the entire HOA board had been replaced, and Whitmore's construction company filed for bankruptcy. Marcus continued farming his land, now protected by legal agreements that prevented any future development interference. Local news stations regularly featured his farm as an example of successful agricultural preservation. The story of his victory over the HOA became a case study in law schools and urban planning programs across the country. On quiet mornings, as he walked his property with Rex at his side, Marcus often paused at the spot where he had first discovered the tunnel. The area was now marked by a small monument, donated by the County Agricultural Association, recognizing his fight to preserve farmland and protect property rights. The inscription read, "In honor of Marcus Johnson and all family farmers who defend the land that feeds us." But Marcus knew the real monument was the farm itself, still operating, still growing food, still owned by the Johnson family. His grandfather would have been proud to know that the land he had struggled to buy in 1952 remained in the family, protected not just by ownership papers, but by one man's refusal to be intimidated. The tunnel had been filled in and the land restored, but the memory of the victory remained. It served as a reminder that knowledge, patience, and strategic thinking could defeat corruption and bullying, even when the odds seemed impossible. And every morning, as Marcus fed his chickens and tended his crops, he smiled knowing that somewhere in Willowbrook Estates, former HOA President Richard Whitmore was probably wondering how a simple farmer had outsmarted them all. The answer was simple: Marcus Johnson had never been simple. He had been underestimated, which in the end had been their biggest mistake. 2 years after his victory over the Willowbrook HOA, Marcus Johnson found himself facing an entirely different kind of challenge. His success had made him famous throughout the county, and now other farmers were seeking his help. But this time, the enemy wasn't just one corrupt HOA, it was a billion-dollar corporation with political connections that reached all the way to the state capitol. It started with a phone call on a crisp October morning. Sarah Chen, a young Asian-American woman who owned a small organic farm 15 miles south of Marcus's property, was crying when she called. "Mr. Johnson, they're trying to take my farm," she said through tears. Megacorp Industries says they have eminent domain rights to build a distribution center. "They're offering me a fraction of what the land is worth, and if I don't sell, they'll just take it anyway." Marcus knew about Megacorp Industries. The massive logistics company had been buying up rural land across 3 counties, promising jobs and economic development while destroying family farms and small communities. Unlike the amateur corruption of the Willowbrook HOA, Megacorp had teams of lawyers, lobbyists, and politicians in their pocket. "Sarah, slow down," Marcus said gently. "Tell me everything from the beginning." Over the next hour, Sarah explained how Megacorp had approached her 6 months ago with an offer to buy her 80-acre farm. When she refused, they began a campaign of harassment remarkably similar to what Marcus had experienced, but more sophisticated. Noise complaints about her farm equipment. Health department inspections triggered by anonymous tips. Zoning challenges claiming her farm violated new regulations, but the real blow came when Megacorp convinced the county to declare her property part of a special economic development zone, giving the company the right to claim eminent domain for public benefit. Marcus felt the familiar anger rising in his chest. After hanging up, he sat in his kitchen, staring out at his own fields. He had won his battle, but the war against family farms was far from over. And now they wanted him to be their general. The next morning, Marcus drove to Sarah's farm. What he found shocked him. The 28-year-old farmer had built something remarkable, a sustainable organic operation that supplied fresh vegetables to food banks and low-income communities throughout the county. Her farm wasn't just a business, it was a lifeline for families who couldn't afford expensive organic produce elsewhere. "My parents came here from Taiwan with nothing," Sarah explained as they walked through her carefully tended rows of vegetables. "They worked in restaurants for 20 years to save money for me to go to agricultural college. This farm represents everything they sacrificed for." Marcus examined the property with his engineer's eye. Sarah's farm was positioned perfectly to block Megacorp's planned expansion. Without her land, their massive distribution center couldn't connect to the interstate highway system efficiently. That's why they were so determined to take it. "Sarah, how many other farmers has Megacorp approached?" Marcus asked. "At least 12 that I know of. Most of them have already sold. The Martinez family held out until last month, but they couldn't afford to fight the legal challenges anymore." That evening, Marcus made a series of phone calls. First to his lawyer Janet Martinez, then to the investigative reporters who had covered his HOA victory, and finally to Dr. Amelia Washington, an economics professor at the State University who specialized in rural development and corporate land grabs. "Marcus, what Megacorp is doing isn't technically illegal," Dr. Washington explained during their phone call. "They've learned to work within the system. They get local politicians to rezone land, claim economic development benefits, and use eminent domain laws that were designed for highways and hospitals to grab private property for corporate profit." "So what can we do?" Marcus asked. "You need to change the game entirely. Don't fight them on their terms, make them fight on yours." The next week, Marcus organized a meeting at the County Grange Hall. 23 farmers attended, along with several small business owners whose livelihoods depended on the agricultural community. The mood was grim, most of them felt defeated before the fight even began. Marcus stood up and looked around the room at faces he had known for decades. 2 years ago, I was where you are now," he began. "Facing an enemy that seemed too powerful, too connected, too rich to beat. But I learned something important: knowledge is power, and patience is a weapon." He spent the next hour explaining his plan. It wasn't about fighting Megacorp directly, that was a battle they couldn't win. Instead, they would expose the corruption behind the company's land grab and turn public opinion against the project. The first phase involved research. Marcus organized teams of farmers and community volunteers to investigate Megacorp's business practices. They discovered a pattern of environmental violations at the company's other facilities. Groundwater contamination in Ohio. Air pollution complaints in Texas. Worker safety violations in Pennsylvania. Dr. Washington helped them analyze the economic claims Megacorp had made to justify the eminent domain seizures. They promised 2,000 new jobs, she explained at their second meeting. But based on their other facilities, the actual number will be closer to 400, and most of those will be temporary construction jobs. Meanwhile, Sarah Chin had been documenting the environmental impact of losing the farms. Her research showed that the 12 farms Megacorp wanted to eliminate produced food for over 15,000 families annually. The company's distribution center would primarily move imported goods manufactured overseas. "We're trading food security for foreign products," Sarah told the local news reporter who interviewed her. How is that economic development? Marcus's masterstroke came when he discovered that Megacorp's lobbyist was the brother-in-law of County Commissioner Robert Hayes, who had cast the deciding vote to create the Special Economic Development Zone. Better yet, Hayes owned property adjacent to the proposed distribution center, property that would increase dramatically in value once the project was completed. Armed with this information, Marcus organized a public relations campaign that would have impressed a presidential candidate. They created a social media presence highlighting the family farms at risk. They organized farm-to-table dinners that showcased the local produce that would be lost. They invited food bloggers, environmental activists, and family farm advocates to visit the threatened properties. The story gained national attention when a celebrity chef with a popular cooking show visited Sarah's farm and posted a video about Megacorp's land grab on his social media accounts. Within 48 hours, the video had been viewed 2 million times. Megacorp tried to fight back with their own publicity campaign, emphasizing jobs and economic growth. But their slick corporate messaging looked hollow next to images of Sarah harvesting vegetables that would feed hungry families. The turning point came during a packed county commissioners' meeting. Marcus had organized over 300 supporters to attend, filling the meeting room and spilling out into the hallway. When Commissioner Hayes tried to defend the eminent domain seizures, Marcus stood up with a folder of documents. "Commissioner Hayes, is it true that your brother-in-law receives $15,000 per month as a lobbyist for Megacorp Industries?" Marcus asked. Hayes stumbled over his response. That's not relevant to this discussion. "And is it true that you own 40 acres adjacent to the proposed distribution center?" Marcus continued. The crowd murmured as Hayes's face turned red. "I've recused myself from any votes that would directly benefit my property." Marcus smiled. "Actually, you haven't. According to these public records, you voted to approve the zoning changes that made the distribution center possible. Those same zoning changes increased your property value by an estimated $800,000. The room erupted in angry shouts. Hayes gavelled for order, but the damage was done. Local news cameras had captured everything, and by the evening news, the story led every broadcast in the region. Within a week, the state attorney general announced an investigation into corruption in county government. Hayes resigned in disgrace. 2 other commissioners who had supported the Megacorp project suddenly discovered concerns about environmental impact and economic feasibility, but Marcus wasn't finished. He had learned from his HOA victory that winning meant more than just stopping the immediate threat, it meant changing the system to prevent future attacks. Working with Dr. Washington and a coalition of family farm advocates, Marcus helped draft new county regulations that required genuine economic impact studies before any eminent domain seizures for private development. The regulations also mandated that any official with financial ties to development projects must recuse themselves from related votes. Sarah's farm was saved, along with 8 others that Megacorp had targeted. The company quietly withdrew their development application and moved their project to another state, but Marcus's greatest victory was yet to come. The publicity from the Megacorp fight had attracted attention from agricultural advocates nationwide. A coalition of family farm organizations asked Marcus to help them create a national strategy for fighting corporate land grabs. 6 months later, Marcus found himself testifying before a congressional subcommittee about the threat facing America's family farms. His testimony, delivered in the same calm, methodical tone he had used against the Willowbrook HOA, helped convince lawmakers to strengthen federal protections for agricultural land. "Family farms aren't just businesses," Marcus told the congressman. "They're the foundation of our food security, our rural communities, and our national character. When we allow corporations to steal this land through legal manipulation and political corruption, we're not just losing farms, we're losing who we are as a country." The bill that emerged from that hearing, nicknamed the Johnson Amendment by agricultural advocates, made it much harder for corporations to abuse eminent domain laws to seize family farms. Back home, Marcus continued farming his land, but now he also served as an informal advisor to farmers facing similar threats across the region. His kitchen table had become a war room where strategies were planned and victories celebrated. On quiet evenings, he would walk his property with Rex, now an old dog who moved slowly but still insisted on making their daily rounds. The monument to his HOA victory had been joined by a larger memorial, a granite stone engraved with the names of the farms saved from Megacorp's land grab. Marcus realized that his grandfather's dream had grown beyond just owning land. The Johnson farm had become a symbol of resistance, a place where ordinary people learned they could fight powerful enemies and win. And in farm communities across America, when corporations came calling with offers that were really threats, people would say the same thing: let's call Marcus Johnson. He'll know what to do. The tunnel that had started it all was long forgotten, filled in and planted over. But the network Marcus had built, farmers, lawyers, activists, and regular citizens who refused to be intimidated, had created tunnels of their own. Tunnels of communication, support, and shared knowledge that ran beneath the surface of corporate power, ready to emerge whenever justice was needed. Marcus Johnson had become more than a successful farmer. He had become proof that in America, David could still beat Goliath, as long as David was smart enough, patient enough, and brave enough to fight.